super interesting from a philosophical perspective because like maybe if the model is trained on like everything in the world up until that point, and then like it probabilistically predicts that like XYZ is going to win the election, then like maybe that is actually like the most probabilistic outcome that the universe, like maybe like the multiverse or whatever that we should have ended up in, but then the world is kind of chaotic, and so actually we end up in a like alternative timeline that has like a different result. I find this actually like very interesting. I think it's like not quite the right way to think about it because, post training messes up all of, it totally depends on like what you post train for and the data that it sees
Yeah.
in the post training. There's like not exactly, um, I take all the information and then I try to predict what's next. It's biased a little bit by all of the things that you did in post training. But I still think it's like a very interesting concept that um it goes back to almost like philosophically this idea of like determinism. Like if you knew, if every single butterfly wing flap or whatever, like could you predict the next thing that happens?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's why we get like these probabilistic predictions from the model, right? Like you mentioned, like you might predict something which is very plausible, and then something surprises you. So the model, like in this task, the model will always give you like, okay, with 70% probability, I think this will happen, and then you grade it based on how close it was given its probability. So yeah, the other thing that I would want to touch upon, which you mentioned, is like, can we like externalize this knowledge from the model, which I think is like a very interesting point, right? So I do think that like the recent search agents that we are seeing, where like the model uses search and is RL trained with search to like basically get information from the internet rather than having to know everything itself. I think this is like a very promising direction towards this, right? Where like, so if you look at like research on why we need bigger models, like one of the main things is that to store all this information that the model does need to know, like all this knowledge, you need a certain number of parameters just from a compression perspective. Like you need a certain amount of memory. And now, if the model, like, again, humans don't do this, right? We don't just, like, we use search engines. We don't try to memorize the whole internet. And if the model can do that as well, I think it's quite interesting if, like, you can get smaller models to perform much better because they're not bottlenecked by their just size in terms of the knowledge they have. They can use this external knowledge source. So I think, yeah, like reinforcement learning for this does seem to be quite a promising direction where we might see more progress on.